The quaint district of Wartburg is in essence a farming community of predominantly German settlers. It's immediately tangible through the architecture and the distinctly exotic fauna and flora. The farm of Fountain Hill Estate is no exception, but it's also home to one of South Africa's most endangered endemic mammals, the dainty tan and white Oribi. Here, amongst very exotic surrounds, is the establishment of one of South Africa's longest active privately run experiments to breed and release these little antelope back into the wild and their natural habitat.
The breeding program started with my dad in the early 1990s. And there was a breeding pair of two that we obtained through the Greytown area, and hence the breeding program, which at that stage was believed to possibly be the right way to go. Obviously, with the objective was to release back onto the farm here and to try and grow the population. But as years progressed, we found that the numbers were not increasing. And so there were a number of questions that needed to have answers to.
From the United States of America, Rebecca Gray is researching Victor Teuber's captive-bred Oribi as part of her master's. She's putting transmitter collars on 10 of the animals chosen for release this year. The day of the capture is left until April, when the fawns are all weaned and big enough to fend for themselves. By collaring the Oribi, Rebecca will then be able to track each individual's movement for more than a year as they spread out across the region, keeping progress on their status and where they go.
The main question is what happens to them, because these people have been breeding them for about 10 years and they've released, they think, close to 50, and they haven't seen hide nor hair since. I mean, I will be very surprised if they all live, let's put it that way, because obviously the history is that they've either disappeared or, which I'd guess they're either being preyed upon or they're dying for some reason, whether it's starvation or parasites or what have you, don't know. It's going to raise more questions than it answers, let's put it that way.
Each collar has a range of many kilometers, allowing Rebecca to follow as far as the Oribi care to roam.
They have mortality sensors on them so that if something happens to them and they unfortunately get killed for some reason, we should be able to find them within 6 hours of their death. And hopefully figure out before, maybe say a carcass is eaten or something, what's killed it.
By evening, all 10 Oribi are safely released into the wildest regions of Fountain Hill Estate. Early the next morning, Rebecca and Mike Ross are keen to learn how far the Oribi have wandered from their release sites, and if they've weathered well the trauma of the day before.
We're right on top of her.
Wild Oribi usually stick together in little family groups of 3 or 4, but these captive-bred animals are not that familiar with one another and very likely to fragment. Unfortunately, 6 of them lost their mates while still in their pens, to either disease or jackal.
I guess with hearing about jackals being around, you sort of worry, but I actually wouldn't have been too surprised if maybe we'd found one dead, or weren't able to find one. But at least we've got live signals for all 10 of them. So yeah, fortunately they're all alive and seem to be doing well.
By the end of the first day, everything seems to be on track, and Rebecca is hopeful for the 12 months that lie ahead. Unfortunately, only 5 days later, the first of her troubles begin.
Yeah, about 20 meters into the cane, we found him just laying there. No signs of any predators or anything around him, no blood, nothing. It just looked like he fell asleep. It would be a shame if it is stress from capture that did kill him, because I haven't heard that happening too much in Oribi. So it wasn't something that we'd really expected at all. We were expecting them to be taken by predators or to be, ridden with parasites or something like that, but not this. So, and what might the samples tell you that just looking at them couldn't?
Well, for example, it'll tell me whether there's infection in this thing.
Okay.
I may find an obvious answer as to why he's dead.
Yeah.
Without doing any samples, but I'll take him now, just in case we want to send him off.
The cause of death is uncertain, and an unsettling start to Rebecca's project. A few days later, Rebecca returns to Fountain Hill, and to one of the more expected problems from years past. A number of the transmitters are leading straight back to the old homestead and the pens.
Jeez. That's 100. White ear tag.
Yeah, it is. But 200 is a white ear tag as well.
I got a beat for 200 down there. Just on the outside still.
Vic said, that over the years they have seen animals pacing the fences and stuff after they've released them. So it does seem to be a problem. But whether they've done that in the past, they've just died before people saw them, I'm not sure. But that's 3 now that are basically hanging right around the camps. I guess it was something we worried about from the beginning, but we don't have exact ages on most of these guys, but they've been in here for most of their lives, and they've been fed, or supplemented at least. And I guess they've just grown way too comfortable in these pens for such a long time that they don't want to give up that comfort, I would say. I mean, I guess it would, if I think about it, would be very stressful for anything to suddenly leave what it's become accustomed to for years and years and then be just thrown out into the wild to defend for themselves, feed themselves, etc. But it is the whole point of the project was to see. I mean, some of them seem to be thoroughly enjoying themselves, but others obviously seem to want to be back where they've grown up. So
Most critics of captive breeding programs cite such high levels of habituation as one of the biggest stumbling blocks to successful reintroduction. Many feel it is far more important to protect the habitat of a species rather than merely the species itself. A further large problem with captive breeding is that of ectoparasites. Without careful management, parasites will often build up in pens, where natural animal movement away from and back to an area is precluded. Pen rotation and burning, after a couple of years, becomes imperative. Alien vegetation and damp too will often exacerbate the problem, and the animals can do nothing to avoid the unpleasant build-up of parasites. Lethargy and disease often follow. But some of the Oribi Rebecca is following are healthy, and already a couple of them have wandered beyond the protection of Fountain Hill onto neighbouring farms.
yeah, go down this middle road, yeah.
An immediate neighbour to the Toibers is the farm of G.T. Meyer. He too has readily agreed to help Rebecca track down those Oribis which stray onto his property.
Okay.
A fast-paced signal indicates a motionless animal.
Something stinking here.
Yeah, I smell it.
How's it signal? Very strong.
Yeah, no, she's here somewhere. It's hard to figure out exactly where she is.
He's been ripped open. Something ripped it open.
Shit. Just go ahead and cut the leather. If you could take pictures, I usually have my digital with me, but okay. It's about 3 weeks, almost a month into the project now since we've caught and collared the animals. And this is the second one we found dead now. This is the first one that looks like it's actually been predated upon by something or killed by, a jackal or something like that.
You see, this is a jackal, eh?
Do you think so?
Yeah, this is a jackal.
As you can see, especially on this side, it obviously bled through where this wound was. So it definitely looks as though something's killed it. I doubt it was dogs. From what I've read about dog kills, they tend to spread the organs and the legs and stuff all over the place. I'd say probably jackal, but I just have to go home and take a look at the papers and show pictures to the experts. But that's what I would guess. So, one more piece of evidence I think that we can almost positively say she was killed by something, is we've just noticed there are actually teeth marks in her radio collar.
Before even finishing with one problem, another soon springs up in its place.
This is one of the animals that we collared, and we had to recapture him on Friday because we found him with a broken leg. So we hope that, at least he can maybe stay in the camps and his leg will heal and maybe he can be a breeding male for captive populations. But I doubt he'll ever be able to go back, be part of my project again.
Mas comes better boy.
It was interesting because he did come straight to the workshops as soon as he was injured, because we'd checked on him 2 days before and he was just fine. So it was almost as if he purposefully came to where people are because he felt more secure, which is, for the purpose of reintroduction, you don't actually want that, because if he'd walked up to the wrong group of people, he would have been an instant meal.
Becoming a meal to poachers is what Rebecca and the Toibers have always felt might be happening to most of their Oribi. Now it seems that is exactly where the proof is leading them.
Now we definitely have found 2 dead, 1 with a broken leg, so that's 3 that are out of the project. And now it looks like we have another one dead. Yeah.
You can hear it. That's definitely a dead signal, eh?
Yeah.
Dip, dip, dip. But now the problem is, that sounds far away. I mean, I lose it there, but it's definitely a dead signal.
Okay. We had been worried about her because that's off the farm and that's a plantation area, and apparently there's some informal settlements there, and the landowner said that she probably wouldn't last long.
Following the road as far as it will take them, Mike and Rebecca must find proof if they are to confirm their suspicions. With the signal just off the road, Mike heads into the plantation on foot.
There it is. You can actually see that this is actually bolted together with 2 bolts, and the bolts have actually been taken out. So it's not as if the strap's just been cut. The bolts have actually been taken out. Yeah, look there, check there. It's actually been, they've unbolted it. Killed the animal and taken off and thrown it over the fence.
You think so?
Oh, well, there you go. Now you know what happened to your animal. Vic was right. Did get poached.
With the day nearly at a close, Vic decides he wants a definitive answer, not just speculation.
Just take about 20 metres, 25 metres, and that's how far it was.
It's probably in one of these houses.
Never know, yeah.
Calling for assistance from the police, they are now looking for any remaining trace of his Oribi.
That there's from the shoulder. It's a thin bone. That's Oribi's darker sized animal.
A thorough internal search of most of the houses only turns up a few bones, so the team moves out back. From past experience, the remains of most poached animals are usually found buried in a shallow grave or pit to discard what cannot be consumed. Mike and Vic have already found traces of animal hair.
The herb is soft, eh?
Rebecca's attention in the meanwhile is caught by something in a dimly lit corner of the house, and she calls for Mike.
There we go. There we go.
Okay.
That's it.
That's it.
Well done, B.
Well done.
I was just looking under the stove. There was a teeny bit poking out. Where's that guy Pete?
That's it. That's what you're looking for. Shouldn't have thrown the collar so close to home.
Yeah.
Rebecca's leaning down and she says, somewhere underneath the stove, so lay down and pull it up.
And it was just a little tiny little
The police must understand clearly that this is protected species. So this is also WWF are involved in this. Endangered Wildlife Trust is involved in with these game. So we're going to take the law right to the end. It's world protected species.
It's on the red data, eh? Yeah, red data list.
But still, the owners of the house deny any knowledge of anything.
He was looking for wood when he went there.
We asked me to find it live or dead. I'll show you something, right? See all that hemorrhaging? That's hemorrhaging, that's been shot. It's like been hemorrhaging all around the side here.
If it's died and then he skinned it later, it shouldn't have bled. Because, you know, your blood circulation stops.
Satisfied to have found a definite answer to their suspicions, Vic, Rebecca and Mike leave the rest of the legalities to the police. Only the very next day, Rebecca is back on the trail of another dead signal. And again, it's taking her straight towards a group of labourers' houses.
If we can go up the road and get around and then see where it's coming from.
Yeah.
With the directionality of Rebecca's signal, she's soon able to run a few transects in relation to the houses to determine if the transmitter is likely to be inside.
Can you go down?
Down this road?
Yeah, okay, that'd be good, thanks. I hate to say it, but it's coming straight from in there again.
You'll go right round it, eh?
Yeah, take a left here, that'd be great.
We'll find it.
I mean, it's definitely around here somewhere. Because we're so close to
This is going to that side.
yeah, I'm pretty sure it's somebody's in here has got it. You know, initially I was glad that we found what happened to the animals, but I was sad, I was depressed about the whole thing because I felt we don't know why these people hunted those animals. I mean, if they were hungry, you know, if they had kids to feed, well, then who am I to say that an animal's more important than feeding your kids? And it's very close.
Close.
Yeah, because I don't have anything plugged into this. No receiver, no anything. I think it's important to prosecute them. As far as the punishment is concerned, I'm not sure about that. If I knew 100% that somebody was just trying to put food on the table, well, I don't want to put them in jail and I don't want to make them pay a hefty fine. But that's always a hard thing to determine. You know, you don't know if they're lying to you or if it's the real thing.
Oh, there's it. Sure, has that, eh? In the ex-pocket, eh? Upin Amazon.
Why computation, right?
Okay. Yeah, we've found the woman. Got it, yeah, we found the transmitter inside the room. Okay, we're still trying.
Like,
If they can do it, it'll be lovely. Okay, okay, bye. Going to fetch him now.
It'll be interesting because I don't think this has actually been unscrewed or, you know, obviously cut off. But I mean, that leads me to believe a couple of things. Maybe that the animal was killed by something already and, you know, the collar just came off, or possibly they cut the head off and pulled the collar off then. I don't know. But we'll see what he says.
Although later to admit guilt, once again the culprit initially denies having anything to do with killing the animal.
Says they skinned it at the spot where they found it, and they only brought the meat that was edible. They left the remains behind.
I think even though we can't find a skin or skull or anything, because he has apparently admitted, and then one of these guys is an eyewitness and saw the whole thing happen, so I think it's a cut and closed case.
With most of her research subjects already dead, Rebecca heads for the Oribi working group meeting, hosted every 2 months by KZN Wildlife. She's been invited to fill them in on her somewhat depressing findings and to discuss a way forward for captive Oribi breeding.
Mr. Chairman, in light of Rebecca's findings, for me it's very clear that captive breeding isn't working in its current format, and we need to...
Quickly just on that.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say Vic has a proper captive breeding program. That needs to be set in.
Yeah. The reason why I'm raising this though, Rebecca, is because this working group has endorsed the way that Vic's setup has produced Oribis in terms of numbers.
Yeah.
And that has been used as the guideline for other organizations and other individuals to initiate captive breeding for Oribi. And for me, there's a very clear differentiation between a captive bred animal and a zoo bred animal.
That's what the project screams out. It says, watch out, you know. And the only reason the Oribi working group used Vic as models because he's the only person doing it.
In fact, he wants to reevaluate his situation.
Yeah, he does. I know they put a lot of money and a lot of time into it.
It needs to
but
be said.
It's all
Needs
wrong.
to be said, or else for what? Yeah.
Following on from this meeting, Rebecca has been invited to the translocation of 6 wild Oribi across the Oribi Gorge on the KwaZulu-Natal south coast. These animals will also help with her research. Today is a positive day for conservation. It will be the first time in 70 years that Oribi have set foot on the southern side of the aptly named gorge. The surrounding landowners are swapping 6 Oribi for a dozen or more reedbuck. It's costly and challenging work, but for many, well worth it if it will increase the Oribi's range. Only 600 of the 2,500 remaining animals in South Africa live today in official reserves and parks. The rest are in the hands of private custodianship. While many irresponsible farmers still plant up much of the Oribi's preferred mist belt grassland habitat, others are doing everything in their power to make a difference. And it is with these kind of landowners that the species stands the greatest chance of survival. Making things even more difficult for Oribi conservation, the KZN population has already been determined as more than one subspecies. As a result, capture and release programs in the future need to take this into cognizance. Future Fountainhead Oribi, for instance, if they were to be released elsewhere, should not be released too far from their natal range. KwaZulu-Natal has 3 distinct subpopulations, one in the north of the province, one in the Midlands, and one stretching south to East Griqualand. Where these populations divide is still unclear. In addition to her masters, Rebecca is assisting with research already underway by KZN Wildlife and the University of Stellenbosch. She is taking DNA samples from as many Oribi as she can, both those caught for her research and those individuals dealt with in the wild. This will better determine the species' exact subpopulation distribution and dynamics. It is imperative that we understand each population's boundaries and the relationship they have with their neighbours before we get too involved with large distance translocations. Mistakes made in ignorance are often irreversible. So what then of the way forward for Vic's captive breeding programme and the Oribi that remain? Clearly, a new approach has to be found if the project is to continue at all.
You know, we expected things to happen, but I don't think we expected them to happen as quickly as they did. And at first it was kind of depressing, I think. It seemed like things were dying left and right. But that said, it was probably actually a good thing that it happened as quick as it did, because it really made people realize what's happening and how fast it happens. Because, I mean, granted, these animals weren't probably the ideal animals to release, but I'm sure it's happening to wild ones too, to a certain degree, and that's what we're hopefully going to try and figure out in the next year also. So we know that poaching is obviously a social issue at the end of the game. So we've put together a survey that asks farm laborers around this area and hopefully other areas as well about their lifestyles, how many children they have, what their diet is, you know, what their monthly income is, do they have a problem supporting themselves, why do they hunt, just to get to the bottom of it. I don't know, I mean, they say, you know, education is the way to get past ignorance. I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon, you know, maybe not 10 years, maybe not 20 years, but I think if we make an effort now, that could possibly make a difference in 20 years' time or so. Maybe in implementing such a program, you could bring them out to a place such as this, show them the animals, maybe even, you know, have a tame Oribi and actually bring it into the classrooms. And that sort of thing is the stuff that I remember when I was a kid that actually made an impact on me.